Okay. Right. The story of Thomas and Mary Poynton brings together the Catholicism, Irish nationalism, and my own area of so-called expertise, the history of the North Shore of Auckland. Thomas Poynton was born 11th of March 1803 in Ballylever, County Meath in Ireland, and worked as an unskilled farm labourer. However, then we immediately start getting into some of the stories that abound when we actually start to talk about Poyntons. And that, one source says he was also educated partly in France. So an unskilled farm labourer also was able to be educated in France. So I don't know what the real situation here, but as I said, it's just part of those myths that seem to come up. And of course, France is because of the Catholic connection. So whether or not he was educated partly in French, certainly he was self-educated, because when you actually see some of the things he's talking about, some of not a great writer, but some of the things he's talking about, obviously he's a person with learning. Around July 1822, he and 14 others were caught up in local unrest in County Meath. Now again, we have this problem with myths and legends, because some commentators have claimed, I say claimed, that he was a member of the White Boys. And that was a secret organisation fighting for Irish tenant farmer land rights. So whether he was a member or not, he was amongst others tried and convicted and transported from Cork to the colony of New South Wales for 7 years. Now, I've actually read through some of the newspaper reports of this trial, and if you read through it, it's virtually a slam dunk. They appear, they're deemed to be guilty, and they're transported. So how innocent he was, I'm not sure, but if he wasn't an Irish nationalist beforehand, he certainly was after that experience. And it's also interesting to follow up that into the 20th century, some newspapers and magazines, especially the New Zealand Tablet, actually covered up those convict origins. I actually read through a profile of Thomas in the New Zealand Tablet, and his background, according to them, was he was a seafarer and just happened to arrive on the coast of Australia. So nothing about the fact he was transported. And I think this also speaks to that whole thing, particularly, and I'm sure some of our Australian guests will relate to this, that and not until the 1970s that it suddenly became cool to be a convict, an descendant from the convicts, from convicts. From the 1970s onwards, and I think this had something to do with both the family history research or also perhaps the greater sense of Australian nationalism, it suddenly became okay to confess that you had a convict in your family tree. So anyway, that notwithstanding, Thomas arrives in Sydney on the 21st of December 1822. Now, not long after receiving a ticket of leave, which is what the process the convicts went to, and that was in 1827, he married Mary Kennedy in Sydney. Now, she was born in Sydney on 5th of June 1812 of Irish parents. Thomas and Mary caught a ship across the Tasman around 1828 to the Hokianga in Northland, and there the Poyntons bred cattle and milled timber on the Mungamuka River. Both Thomas and Mary were firm Catholics, and right to their dying day, they were unrepentant supporters of Irish nationalism. Between 1831 and 1837, the Poyntons claimed to have bought 4,450 acres from local Maori and regularly crossed backward and forth to Sydney, where they had their 2 surviving children baptised into the Catholic faith. I'll speak a little bit about the children a little bit later on. It should be noted that there were no local Catholic clergy until Bishop Pampalia arrived in January 1838, and Pampalia initially stayed with the Poyntons at Papakawa while his house was being built at Kororaraka. Pampalia led the first Catholic Mass in Aotearoa, New Zealand on 13th of January 1838 at Totara Point in the Hokianga, with the Poyntons in attendance. Thomas is said to have later protected Kampalia from local Maori. Now, that was because local Maori were actually influenced by Wesleyan missionaries, but it should also be noted that Kampalia kept maintaining good relations with those of other faiths. In October 1840, Thomas reported to the St Patrick's Society in Sydney that he was collecting money for church funds from local Maori in the Hokianga. Governor Fitzroy, of course our second governor here in New Zealand, compensated Thomas for his pre-1840 land purchases from Maori. That's the 4,450 acres. That was they were deemed to be not able to be processed, but instead he was compensated. And after 1846, Thomas and family moved to Auckland. He bought land on the Auckland Isthmus, South Auckland, and on the North Shore. By 1849, Thomas Poynton owned 130 acres on the North Shore, with 67 acres on Lake Pupuki, and has a good claim to be the first Pākehā family in the lake area. He was running sheep and he grew wheat, and his residence on Lake Pupuki is confirmed in the 1850 Auckland jury list. Now note I'm referring to Lake Pupuki. It wasn't until the 1860s that Lake Pupuki started to be called Lake Takapuna. Takapuna is actually was originally the name going for a little stream down the bottom of North Head there, and the name was brought up to the Lake Pupuki area, possibly because of Potawanu, who from the 1850s he and his whānau were actually given land in that particular area, not actually on Lake Pupuki itself, but along Takapuna Beach and down Eastland Road. So that's but as I say, from at least the 1840s, it was known as Lake Pupuki. In Takapuna, from the 1860s, the Poyntons prospered and became pillars of the local community. Thomas was elected a warden for the 100 of Pupuki, which is a very early and short-lived form of local government. And this is something that I find personally very good, is a founder and donor to the local volunteer-run library. However, Thomas and Mary never forgot they were Irish and remained firm Catholics, while being respected across denominational lines. They donated 10 acres to the local Catholic Church, and their status in the community is commemorated by Mary Poynton Crescent and the Poynton Retirement Village, both on what was part of their property. Mary died 15th of October 1891, and Thomas on 9th of March 1892, and they are buried side by side at O'Neill Cemetery in Bayswater. They were the first Catholics to be buried in that cemetery, and their well-maintained headstones survive today. Now, when I was putting together this talk, Maria asked me about photos. When I wrote an article about the Poyntons for the Channel magazine, I'm sure some of the North Shore residents will know of the Channel magazine monthly glossy, which is circulated. When I wrote that article, the only photos I could source at that time were actually of the headstones, and that came for me physically going down to the cemetery and taking a shot of the headstones. More recently, there have been photos of Thomas, well, there's a photo of Mary and a drawing of Thomas that was actually featured in the New Zealand Herald and Northern Advocates in 1938. But the pictures were actually quite grainy, so I decided not to reproduce them here for you. But as I say, if you do a picture search, illustration search in Papers Past for Poynton, you'll come up with the two photos. As I said, there's a photograph of Mary, obviously taken probably about the 1880s or thereabouts, and a line drawing of one of Thomas, but that I date to much earlier than that. So I referred to the family. Their only son, Edward Jervois of Poynton. He was born in 1832, but he died in early childhood. And neither of their daughters had any children. Now, their daughters were Catherine Maria, who married into the Shea family, S-H-E-A, well, a very important local family in the Takapuna area, and Margaret Mary, who married into the McDonnell family in the Takapuna area. But as I said before, neither had any children. In 1899, Catherine, that's the first of the two daughters, sold land to the Sisters of Mercy to provide for her until her death, which was in 1914. And this became part of the site of the Sisters of Mercy Mount Carmel Convent from 1922, and later that of Carmel College from 1957. Waitemata Health's North Shore Hospital, which opened in 1958, is also on what was part of Thomas Poynton's land. Now, Thomas did have a brother. I noted there was a reference to the Poyntons in the, I think it was the Taupo area. His brother's name was Jervis, J-E-R-V-I-S, and there are descendants still living today. So if they're related to him, it's via the Thomas's brother, Jervis. So that's the Poynton family. So we have a group that have Thomas, who's transported to Australia. He marries the daughter of Irish family living in Sydney. They moved to New Zealand to make their fortune, so to speak. And during that time, they're all their faith and their support for Irish nationalism is still maintained right up till death. So I wanted to contrast that with the Kelly side of my family. And there's a bit of difference. Irish nationality, yes, but they were military and Anglican. And of course, this was before the disestablishment of the Anglican Church as the only church in Ireland. People may recall that anti-disestablishmentarianism, which is supposed to be the longest word in the English language, because that actually came from those who were against the disestablishment of the Anglican Church in Ireland. Also, Irish nationalism was not a fervent cause in my family and descendants down the generations. The North Shore connection is that in 1938, my grandparents moved from Panmure to Northcote, where my grandfather became the principal at Northcote Primary. The Verrans, on the other hand, have been there since 1905. Nevertheless, Ireland still played a role, if you like, in their worldview. My great-grandfather, Archibald, or Archie, on St. Patrick's Day, would always walk around Whangarei in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and my mother recounts to me that he would have with him a wooden four-leaf clover, couldn't find any, so he had to make one, and if lucky, a small bottle of Irish stout, which he would sip on all day. So it's rather charming, the little romanticized version of what it means to be Irish, but on the other hand, rather a charming little story about someone who still recognizes that they have another country that they're related to and have some reference to. So in 2016, Susan and I went to an Irish pub in Cobb and drank a pint of Guinness. And we regard that as being 164 years since the Kelly family left for Cowick, and the first time that the Kelly family and descendants, well, at least on my side, had been back to Ireland. So I wanted to now just talk a little bit more about the Kellys and their arrival in Howick in 1852. And these notes I actually took from my late mother and I decided in 2002 that we'd have a family reunion. It was 150 years since the Kellys had arrived in Howick, so we grabbed up all the surviving relatives, extended relatives that we could locate, and we got them all together, and we met in Howick, and I took my little tiki tour around the different parts of Howick, pointing out the different parts of the area where the Kellys had owned land and that sort of thing. And of course, we ended up, as all good families should, with a nice meal at a restaurant. But anyway, so when I was speaking to them, these are part of the notes that I gave them. And I think if I use the word fencibles, I think a number of people will know what those mean, but I will describe a little bit coming on to that. Hey, Bruce. Between 1847 and 1852, some 720 Royal New Zealand fencibles arrived in the Auckland area. As a substitute for the 2,500 permanent troops Governor Grey had asked for. All of them were war veterans under 48 years old, with at least 15 years army service, and many had served in India, Afghanistan, or Canada, Upper or Lower Canada. Lower Canada is around Quebec, Montreal, and Upper Canada is more around Ontario and that sort of those places. If you're unsure of that, each family was offered free passage, a 2-bedroom cottage, and an acre of land, and settled in Onehunga, or Otaho, or Panmure, or Howick. Each fencible had to attend church parade each Sunday and participate in 12 days drill a year. The Inchinen was the second last ship to sail. 78 fencible pensioners, 68 women, and 113 children left London on 14th of January 1852 and arrived in Auckland Harbour on 27th of May 1852. 22, mainly children, had died on the voyage out, and there were 10 babies born. Howick was the largest settlement for the fencibles, and it was 13 miles from Auckland. I'll leave it to you to work out the case. It was settled from late 1847 and was known for its cold north wind, fern and scrub, and, really importantly, lack of firewood. The clay soil was also hard to dig. 2 days after arrival in Auckland on the 29th of May, the women and children were shipped to Howick on the steamer Governor Wynyard. The men were marched overland, and their first task was to repair the local roads. James Kelly was born 15th of January 1807 at Gibraltar. He was baptised at King's Chapel, hence the Anglican link. His father was also James, who was also a soldier, and his mother was Letitia née Gallagher. James, that's the one born in 1807, joined the Royal Artillery at Woolwich, Kent, on 19th of August 1819, and later served in the 6th Battalion, first as a driver, obviously horse and cart, and from 1st of March 1826 as a gunner. His service included 13 years, 6 months in Ontario, Canada, and he married Frances Moore, who was born in 1809 in Dublin on 1st of March 1827. He was discharged on a pension in Ireland on 12th of January 1847, and of course the Great Famine, the typhus epidemic, is beginning to raise up from then onwards. So life in Ireland in the late 1840s was not a good place to be. The family lived at least in Dublin and Tullamore. On discharge, that's on discharge from the Royal Artillery, James was described as short of breath and with chronic rheumatism. He was 5'7.5" taller. Those who know me know that I didn't take after him. I'm slightly taller than 5'7", with grey hair and grey eyes, or brown, of fair complexion, of good character. When the family immigrated in 1852, the eldest daughter remained behind. She was like married. Those children that immigrated were Frances, was born 12th of December 1834 at Kingston, Ontario. Mary Ann, who was born 7th of November 1856, also at Kingston, Ontario. Letitia, who was born 6th of July 1839 at Kingston, Ontario. And William Henry, who was born 6th of August 1845 at Fort Donica, Enison, County Clare. And George Edward, born 20th of August 1849 at Tullamore, County Offaly. So by 1845, obviously he's moved back to Ireland. James was now William Henry is the important person here, and I'll explain a little bit more how I fit into that vicinity. James Kelly was allocated lot 174, which was just one lot up on the northern side of Rodney Street and the corner of Lewis Street in Howick. Full title was given in 1858, which is less than the required 7 years, but it was decided that that's what they would do. And then he later had lot 199 on the southern side of the corner of Baird and Drake Streets. Now, there's an excellent history of the fence walls that was published in the 1980s, and it's still brilliant history, and that includes maps and that of the different lots that the Howick and the Tahoe and Panmure were only Hunga pensioners were allocated. Now, James Kelly died 29th of March 1884, and his name's on the Lich Gate at Howick. And Frances Kelly, his wife, died 26th of September 1892. Now, he actually served in the New Zealand Wars. He didn't serve under fire. He served in the commissariat. But nevertheless, because of that service, he received a New Zealand War Medal. And he received a regimental war medal, not the militia war medal, but the regimental one, which was actually thicker and had more mana to it. One of his sons, William Henry Kelly, also served in the New Zealand Wars, served under fire, and received a militia medal. So there's 2 New Zealand War medals in our family. And as it's passed down to the eldest son, it went from my grandfather to my uncle, because he was the boy rather than my mother, and that's now in the hands of his son Geoffrey. But as I say, in the immediate family, those medals are still there. William Henry married Mary Mullins, 18th of June 1865. The eldest child was Archibald Oswald Kelly, Archie Kelly that I mentioned earlier. And he was the father of 2 sons. He married 2 sisters. One of the sons was Leslie Oswald, and the other one was Roy Douglas Kelly. That's my grandfather. So thank you for listening to my story of the Kelly family and the Poynton family. As you can see, there are differences in terms of how they thought about Ireland. There are differences, they saw it through the lens, if you like, of religion, Catholic versus Anglican, but also in terms of Ireland as a independence, as a nation. And as I say, that whereas the Poyntons took one particular point of view on that, the Kelly family, that was something that was just, Ireland was something just seen through the lens, if you like, of my great-grandfather. That was Archie, who my mother said was a lovely fellow. And that was basically a place where 4-leaf clovers, Guinness, but that was about it. That they didn't have any long, there was nowhere to write to back in Ireland, there was nowhere to come visit from Ireland. And so the version of Ireland was rather lost over the years, whereas I'm sure for the Poynton family, Ireland was still really important. And that was also buttressed by the fact that we had a succession of Irish priests coming out to Pompalia and with others successively coming from Ireland and bringing the story with them. And of course, in the 19th century, a number of Irish settlers coming out directly from Ireland, bringing the Irish story with them. So thank you for listening to me. And I'll now pass over to my right, Susan. And we'll have questions when we finish. Thank you. Right. So